Guys, bang bang! I'm sitting here with the man, the myth, the legend. Alan is here, and just first of all, thank you so much for coming to do this. I know for those that don't know, Silvergate recently went public, and he has been on the road for 2+ weeks, telling story after story and fundraising. So he's pretty talked out at this point. But thanks so much for coming to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
For sure. Let's get started with just your personal story, kind of what you did pre-Silvergate, then we can get into the crypto stuff.
Sure. So actually started in banking as a teller while I was in college. And so over the last almost 40 years, I've done just about every job that you can do in a bank.
Amazing.
And I did spend some time in private industry in the 1990s in both retail and manufacturing. And so actually ran companies that needed banking services, and then in the late 90s got back into banking. And it was a business bank, and so really liked being back on the other side of the table, helping businesses. And as we were just talking about, one thing I know, having run a business and then being back in banking, businesses just want their bank to work. They just don't want to think about it, right? And so our whole goal is if we can just make it seamless for our customers to to kind of do their business and not have to worry about their bank. But anyway, so done that for most of my career. I joined Silvergate in 2008, right at the height of the financial crisis. And what attracted me to Silvergate was it was a very clean but small platform that I thought was going to be really good to build a foundation on. And little did I know that around that same time that I was joining Silvergate, there was also this white paper, being written about Bitcoin. I didn't know anything about it. I'm not a cypherpunk, and so we just went about building the bank. And because we were clean during the financial crisis, coming out of that, we could lend when a lot of other banks were struggling. And so for the first few years, we were growing like crazy on the asset side, making loans. And ironically, what we were struggling with was growing the deposit side of the balance sheet to fund our loan growth.
Why was that a challenge at the time?
Yeah, it was really just because, first of all, Silvergate was not well known. And Silvergate didn't really have a deposit franchise, if you will. We had 4 branches kind of spread out all over Southern California. Didn't really have a brand name. And then at that time, if you were a business and you had a banking relationship, you didn't want to lose it because there was so much turmoil, coming out of the financial crisis. And so it was really difficult to kind of, shift people's mindset to leave their bank and join a new one. And so, and that's certainly understandable. So we just kept on lending, and we were finding creative ways to fund the loans. Opening CDs and doing a little internet banking and some of that stuff. And then along the way in 2013, I started reading about Bitcoin, and it was just intellectual curiosity at that point. I wasn't really thinking about it and how it might intersect with Silvergate. It was just kind of in my spare time, I read stuff, and we were looking for deposit niches for the bank, and I was reading about Bitcoin, and I was reading that there were companies that were being formed to provide infrastructure to this new thing called Bitcoin. It wasn't called crypto, it wasn't, it was
just
really,
Bitcoin.
It was Bitcoin only at the time, and so I learned that there were companies that were raising venture money, so they had deposits. They wanted to put them in a bank, Silvergate's bank, and they were getting kicked out of their banks. And so obviously there was a reason they were getting kicked out, and it was the perception of risk, right?
It was, and talk a little bit more about that perception, right? Because I think this is a key piece where if you don't pay attention to Bitcoin and crypto on a daily basis, any other industry in the world, maybe other than cannabis, banking is readily available if you're in a developed world country.
Right.
As you're saying, that wasn't true in 2013, and actually wasn't true for a pretty long period of time.
Right.
Why were other banks getting rid of these crypto or Bitcoin companies? Like, what was that risk that they perceived?
Sure. So there were two things from a regulatory perspective. One was just a general sense in the United States where banks were kind of de-risking money service businesses, check cashing companies, payday lenders. There was this whole kind of movement in the larger banks away from providing banking services to those money service businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about companies that were being formed at the time, example I use often is Coinbase,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Coinbase is a money transmitter and money service business. And so they were struggling to find bank accounts because lots of banks were kind of they were leaving that segment. So
Mm-hmm.
that was one reason. The other reason was because of the whole concern about anti-money laundering, BSA,
Mm-hmm.
and that really has more to do with kind of terrorist financing, bad actors, and it was right around that time that Silk Road happened, right?
Yep.
And so big concern that the primary use case for Bitcoin at the time was for nefarious activity, right? And what people didn't really understand at the time was that, well, if you're using Bitcoin for that kind of stuff, you've got a higher probability of getting caught, right? So that was a little bit of an aha moment for us early on, because I was reading about Bitcoin, read about Silk Road, read that companies were getting kicked out of banks, and I thought, well, there might be an opportunity for Silvergate. But the first thing, we're a regulated financial institution. We're a state chartered bank in California. We're a member of the Federal Reserve. Our deposits are insured by the FDIC, and so we had a lot of regulatory oversight, and still do. And so the first thing I did was called our compliance officer, and I said, "Hey, have you heard about Bitcoin?" And the great thing was she had.
Oh, really?
Yes. So
Wow.
she's now our chief operating officer. Her name is Kate Frere. And Kate immediately sent me articles, and it's so cool because at Silvergate we've got this culture and just a whole bunch of folks who are curious,
Mm-hmm.
who are reading about stuff in their spare time, and so we started a dialogue, and I said, well, do you think we can figure out how to bank these companies because it might be a source of deposits?
Mm-hmm.
And that was as simple as it was. We've become a lot more sophisticated in our account offering to our
Yep.
customers. But in the early days, it was just
Here's a niche that is no one else wants to serve. If we can figure out how to serve them, but also kind of pay attention to the risk,
yeah.
then we can drive deposits. We can continue to fund loans, grow assets.
That's right. That's
Got
right.
it. And so let's fast forward a little bit. As you grew that business, the first customer is somebody that you guys had actually known for a while. Maybe tell the story a little bit about
Sure.
kind of who that first customer was and
Yeah.
how that all came together.
Yeah, so it's funny how things in life work. So probably 2 or 3 years previous to that, I had met this company by the name of Second Market, and Second Market was founded by Barry Silbert, and his claim to fame, or the way I heard of him, was they were making a market for illiquid securities, kind of pre-IPO. So. Making a market for Facebook stock before Facebook went public, for instance. Okay, and the reason our paths crossed, and I didn't meet Barry at the time. I met someone who worked for him, but I think they had a thesis that, okay, where are there other markets where there might be illiquid securities, or illiquid ownership, people that want liquidity, and there's all these privately owned independent banks across the country, and so that's how we met. Silvergate, up until a week ago, was a privately owned company, and so we met. We talked about maybe doing something together, and that never really took off. Little did I know that I think Barry was already kind of starting to pay attention to Bitcoin, but. What the intersection there was, I think Second Market got to know us as a bank that was maybe willing to look at things a little differently, and we've just kind of had this process, or this methodology of looking at risk. What is the perception of the risk versus the actual risk.
Yep.
Because oftentimes there's a, and that's the whole thing about Bitcoin too, right? But if the perception of risk is here, but you can mitigate that risk, and the risk is really here, then all of this is opportunity,
Yep.
right?
We talk about mispriced risks all the time.
Absolutely,
right? Yeah,
absolutely. And so so that's the way we looked at Bitcoin, and and so in 2013, all of a sudden we start getting referrals from Second Market for companies in the Bitcoin space, and it just coincided with us looking at it, and so. So in January of 2014, our very first customer in this space was Second Market. They're now known as Genesis Trading, and the whole, Barry sold Second Market to NASDAQ and created the Digital Currency Group. So what started as one account with Second Market that became Genesis is now we are their bank. And they've made a lot of investments in companies over the years, and a lot of those companies are now clients of Silvergate as well.
It's amazing, and it's so funny how Barry and Digital Currency Group have become a very important part of the ecosystem. But
Yep.
in the very early days, obviously, kind of being that first customer, I think probably gave you some confidence that, hey, look, at least we got one person to do this.
Well, yeah, and the other thing that was important is because we are regulated. We have to make sure that we're doing everything right, and so going and banking Second Market, because of the fact that they were a broker dealer, so we knew that they were familiar with regulation. They understood KYC, know your customer. They understood BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, AML, anti-money laundering, all of those things. They had to do that for their customers as well. So we looked at it as like providing banking services to another regulated company. But the cool thing was that we also went to school right away on understanding what it was they were doing. So in order for us to get comfortable so let's say that Second Market was facilitating the buying or selling of Bitcoin between two parties, and the U.S. dollars were going to go across Silvergate Bank's wire system, right? So what we were doing in January 2014 is we were asking the Second Market, hey, for that transaction that you're sending that wire, provide us the blockchain address. So that, because what we want to do is go to a block explorer, and we want to type in that address, and we want to see a transaction that represents the dollars that's going through the bank. And I think they were kind of surprised that a bank was even asking that question in 2014.
For sure. And so today, like, you go from that first customer to maybe share a little bit about just like where you guys are from a size. I know in the prospectus you guys have shared a bunch of this, but more than 800 customers today, and kind of just talk about where you've gotten to with the business, and then we can go into kind of what those products are.
Sure. So today we have close to 800 customers. It started small, obviously, and I think by the end of 2016, we still only had a couple dozen customers. But importantly, there were some of the most well-known companies, that still exist today. And so back in the day, we were, we got to meet all the crypto OGs before anyone knew they were OGs, right? And
they were just people looking for bank accounts.
Absolutely, and so we were just very blessed. I will say there's certainly an element of luck, and an element of just kind of being opportunistic. But we ended up, banking some of the best, most well-respected companies in this little ecosystem. And then in 2016. We hired the other really important person in this story for just, first let me say there are over 200 employees at Silvergate who every day come to work figuring out how to just kind of kill it for our customers. It's just, it's a pleasure to work with them. Ben Reynolds is a guy that we met. I met him in January, I think, of 2016.
Okay.
He knew nothing about Bitcoin. And
like most people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were just looking for somebody to help us, what should we be doing next, right? We had a couple dozen customers, maybe 40, 50 million in deposits. The bank was about maybe 6 to 800 million in assets. Okay, so deposits didn't even represent 10% of the assets at the time, and but we had great customers, and so Ben, what he did was he just went out to our customers and said, "Hey, I'm new. Explain to me what you do, and how can we be more helpful?" And it was out of that dialogue that the SEN was born. We call it the Silvergate Exchange Network. Most of our customers call it the SEN.
Yeah, SEN for SEN, Silvergate Exchange Network.
Absolutely, yes, thank you. And
for some of the people listening, they won't get that, so I got to clarify for them.
Yeah, so the idea was born really out of talking with our customers about the pain points that they experienced, the friction, the banking friction, getting money into and out of the crypto ecosystem. And even though we were helping them do that, some of our customers, especially the exchanges, they wanted to be able to do that at scale. Okay, so how does that work at scale? Well, you really need to build an API. And there are a lot of companies, a lot of banks in the country that have APIs for doing things like pulling an account balance or transaction history. There's probably less than 24 banks in the U.S. that actually have a transactional API that will allow you to transfer value. And so that was the really kind of aha moment for us, is that we've got a lot of customers who are actually transacting with each other, but without the ability to do that in a programmatic way. And so it's really time consuming. So first we had to upgrade our core data processing system, which we did in 2016. We then started building the API. And then in 2017, we started connecting people to each other, our customers to each other. And that timing, again, talk about luck, because in 2017, we were really poised when the market took off.
Yep.
And we went from having less than a couple dozen customers to having a little over 200 customers by the end of 17. We grew. We doubled the size of the bank in a year. Now that was the bull market of 2017.
But again, it's important that you guys were doing exactly what you'd been doing all along. You were offering banking services to folks that were playing by the rules, doing the right things in crypto. And at the same time, even in 2016 and 17, just like in 2013, other banks were still uncomfortable. They were still shutting people off. They were still kicking people out. And so I think when I first heard, hey, Silvergate is kind of friendly to this, it was in a thank God we have them, right? Because where else are we going to go if there's not Silvergate? There wasn't very many options at the time.
Sure.
Right. And obviously you guys benefited from having done the work up front and kind of being open-minded and working with those companies, and obviously doing a good job because the reputation spread and the business took off.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah. So I just feel very blessed that the timing worked out in such a way that we were working on this, and that we were in the right place at the right time. And then obviously doing the right things, but that gets back to the team, back at world headquarters, of Silvergate in La Jolla. But
they're living in Southern California. It's cold here in New York this morning, and I'm thinking about, what are you doing here when you could be in Southern California?
Yeah, it is a little chilly out there.
So, all right. So, anyone who's part of this Silvergate Exchange Network, talk about what changes for them from a user experience standpoint, and what functionality does the network actually give them, right?
Yep.
So, what's the value?
Yeah. So if you're a member of the SEN, you can transact with other members of the SEN 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and you're transmitting fiat currency, primarily U.S. dollars, although we have opened this up for other fiat currencies as well, and your money is there instantly.
Got it.
So
it's like Venmo for corporations.
We joke about this. One of the guys back at the office jokes that his primary role in life is to connect 1970s legacy banking technology to the 24/7 crypto market. But I believe we were the first bank in the world, and I'm not sure if anyone else is doing this yet. But to be able to take the legacy banking system that only operates 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, and bring it into the 24/7 crypto market that never sleeps.
Mm-hmm.
And this becomes really important if you are an institutional investor. And I should say this: we have an institutional focus. When we talked earlier about the almost 800 customers, that's broken down into three categories. The first category would be exchanges, OTC desks, etc. And then we connect them with institutional investors. These are family offices, hedge funds, folks that are approaching digital currencies as an asset class. Okay, and so they're employing different investment strategies. And what they want to do is they want to have confidence in their banking relationship. But then importantly, if we can make it efficient for them to use their capital to get on and off of different platforms, and not just in the U.S. but around the world. So we started obviously as a U.S. centric operation, but we have customers internationally. And so if you wake up on a early Saturday morning or Sunday morning or a holiday, and you see that something's going on in the crypto market in Asia, and you want to put some money to work, you can log into your account at Silvergate, push some money over onto whatever exchange you're working with, or call your OTC desk, and say, hey, I want to buy or sell. And you can do it just like that, and so it's really been a game changer for our customers, and then that has just really just kind of helped grow the business, because many of our customers, they don't want to trade with others unless they're on the SEN, because we just take out the friction. There is literally no friction on the US
it really
side.
is the true kind of network effect, right? In the sense that once somebody comes over, then they want all of their partners to come over, right? Once those people come over, you get more people to come in, etc. Let's talk a little bit about kind of how you see the bank playing with crypto, right? So you've built the SEN, obviously, which has been incredibly valuable for folks, but you're not a crypto company, right? You're still a legacy regulated financial institution that you look like a bank, you smell like a bank, right? You walk like a bank, so you're a bank.
We're a bank.
And you provide necessary infrastructure to crypto companies, right? And I think there's two components that are important here. One is that connection or that support is a point of failure for the crypto industry, right? We've seen in countries like India where the regulator stepped in and said to the regulated financial institutions, you are outlawed from working with crypto companies. Well, that doesn't sound like a big deal, except for now the crypto company has no bank account to store fiat, pay employees, etc. It can be very kind of detrimental to their business. But do you just continue to build financial services from like the legacy world to support these companies? Do you have ambitions to go into kind of the crypto world and become more of like a crypto bank in the future? Kind of just talk to me, knowing that there's some stuff you could say around regulation that the regulators allow you to say and some that you can't with forward-looking statements, etc. But just like, how do you see this evolving over time as you continue to support these 700, 800 customers?
So first, to touch on bank-specific regulation, we would not be able to do this were it not for the support of our regulators, right? And so the way that looked from the very beginning was in 2014. As soon as we started banking this industry, we had a handful of customers. We invited our regulators in. I can show you a presentation the summer of 2014 that we made to the State Banking Department and the Federal Reserve. And it was essentially a Bitcoin tutorial. Okay, this is how Bitcoin works. It was the graphics from the distributed ledger, all that kind of stuff. But then we segmented the market, and it was obviously a very nascent market, and it still is. But we looked at it the same way then as we look at it today, which is we said, look, there's the different verticals. Some folks are approaching Bitcoin as an asset class, as a new asset. Some people are thinking about it as a payment rail. You can think about like the BitPays of the world that are trying to disrupt, the payment side of things. And we said we're gonna focus on this institutional market. And then the other thing we're gonna do is focus on other companies that are building infrastructure. Whether they be protocol developers, miners, etc. But what we're not going to do is kind of play in that middle space, which is the remittance space, because that's not how we're set up. We don't have a credit and debit card offering. So that really wasn't where we wanted to play. But importantly, back to your question. So early on, we explained to the regulators, this is how we view it. These are the controls that we're putting in place. This is how we're monitoring, the KYC, AML, et cetera. And by doing that, having that dialogue with the regulators early, prior to their next exam, it allowed them the opportunity to prepare for when they came in to do their annual exam. Okay. Fast forward now, for 2014, that was first year, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. We just finished our 6th annual regulatory exam, right?
Yep.
We're not allowed to talk about regulatory ratings, but suffice it to say, we've been doing this for 6 years. Our program has become a lot more sophisticated. I was telling you earlier about, looking at the, at the blockchain to look at a specific address to see a transaction. That was before Chainalysis, Elliptic, Cipher Trace, all these other tools. Elementus, yes, got to get them all in there. Thank you for that. So that was before all these tools were developed, which we've, obviously now incorporated into our systems, right? And so our process has matured as the ecosystem has matured. So as we move forward, we continue to build our program, and then we're customer driven. Everything that we do is in response to our customers. The SEN was born out of a customer demand, our customer requests saying, hey, it's painful to, the banking friction is painful, and the lack of liquidity, the counterparty risk, and so really trying to smooth all that away. That's how the SEN was born. Now that we've got, growing towards 1,000 customers in this space, our customers are saying, we love the SEN for the U.S. dollar. We love the SEN for yen, the SEN for euro, the SEN, for the, British pound sterling, the Singapore dollar, et cetera. So we're enabling foreign currency exchange, which is something that Silvergate never did in the past, right? But we also recognize our customers want to do it at scale, right? They're all thinking about scale.
Yeah, their scale and their global, right?
Exactly.
Is the two big components that this
right.
industry probably more than most has. When a business starts on day one, it's a global business.
Exactly. Right. So we stood up a foreign currency desk earlier this year, and we're in the process of establishing all those correspondent banking relationships around the world, so that we can facilitate foreign currency exchange. So that's the most recent product that we've added. The next thing we're working on is credit doesn't exist in this market, right? The way it does in other mature financial markets. The concept of prime brokerage, all of these things that just kind of work in the traditional financial system don't exist in crypto. And so one of the things we're working on right now is the ability to provide leverage to customers who are long Bitcoin. And because of the 24/7 nature of the market and the 24/7 nature of SEN, again, I think we're probably one of the only banks in the world that has the capacity, the capability to actually do something like this. You can think of it as kind of in traditional kind of margin lending, and I'll put margin lending in quotes because we're not a, Bitcoin's not a security, and we're not a broker dealer. We're a bank, so we're looking at it as providing collateralized lending, which is what we do. We make loans and we like collateral. The collateral for these loans is going to be Bitcoin. It'll be Bitcoin only for the foreseeable future because it's the only deep market,
most
right?
liquid one.
Yeah, exactly. But that's something that we're in the process of launching a pilot this quarter, and so we're going to do it small to start with, the same way we got into this initiative. Let's get some of our best customers on both sides of the SEN, right? And they're already trading with each other. They're already customers. They're customers of the exchange. They're customers of us. And then let's figure out how we can offer them credit. And so we're working on that right now. And then going into next year, the other product that we're working on is a digital settlement offering, so that we can up to this point, we've only touched fiat currency,
Okay.
and we are contemplating also providing a settlement service for the digital asset.
Interesting.
So that'll be a game changer, we believe, because just as our customers have asked us for, they asked us for the send, they didn't know what to call it, and nor did we. They asked us now for the send for foreign currencies. They've asked us for credit. They're asking us, hey, we trust you with this. We trust you with our dollars. We'd love you to also stand in the middle of the digital side of the trade. And so we get all that done, and
it's a pretty robust offering.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think you've learned the most since 2013 when you first read the Bitcoin white paper to today? So 6 years, that's more than 50% of the lifetime of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
If you kind of think of it in that sense, and you have built some of the most important infrastructure for this asset and this industry, but it wasn't traditional like Bitcoin infrastructure, right? It was the legacy banking stuff. What would you say is your biggest takeaway or lesson learned over those 6 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, first of all, recognizing that we're a bank. Okay, so and believe me, when you catch the bug, I've heard people say, go down the rabbit hole, whatever metaphor you want to use here, and then you happen to be in this position where you have access to all these these OGs. There's a temptation to want to run off and do all of this, crypto's going to solve cancer, and it's going to cure cancer and solve world hunger, and all those things, and say, hey, wait a second, what can we do as Silvergate? We're a California state chartered bank, member of the Federal Reserve, and we've got these great customers who have real problems that they'd like us to solve. So probably the biggest takeaway is let's stay in our lane, okay? But hey, that lane can be pretty broad. But we don't need to go out and do some of these other kind of esoteric blockchain things. We just need to solve problems for our customers, and as long as we're being responsive to what our customers are asking us for, and it's legal and permissible for us to do it, then we've got just an incredible amount of opportunity, and we don't need to go out and look for the next thing. So we're not, we don't have skunkworks at the bank trying to figure out, gosh, if we build this, I wonder if our customers will want it. It's rather just taking in all of what our customers' needs are, and sifting through, what can we really do to help.
For sure. And so we're happy to be recording this on a day where Google just announced that they're going to start offering checking accounts to users. Yeah. Facebook's got their Facebook Pay, which is separate from Libra.
Right.
And we've obviously seen Square and the Cash App, et cetera.
Yeah.
Kind of all these technology companies that are pushing into the banking industry. What's kind of your take running a bank that's been very successful in a specific vertical, right? And obviously, you're growing very quickly. How do you look at the balance between these large technology companies that, for all intents and purposes, probably have better technologists, right, just resource-wise, than most of the financial industry? But the financial industry understands finance, banking, regulations much better than the tech companies. Like, how do you see this playing out over time?
Yeah, so it's interesting, the announcement this morning by Google. I mean, they were, at least the article I read in the Wall Street Journal, they were very specific that they aren't trying to be the bank, right? They're going to partner, at least what I saw, they're going to partner with Citi and with Stanford Credit Union. So they recognize that they're not a bank. And so I think one of the biggest takeaways there is that what does Google have? They have distribution, right? What does Facebook have? Distribution. And so we recognize at Silvergate we don't have distribution right now. We're certainly
you're building it.
We're building it, and in the institutional market, I would say we're building that distribution. But the distribution of having millions, hundreds of millions, and billions of retail consumer customers, that's just something that really, to your point, the tech companies are much better at building those networks, and so even when Libra came out, or when Libra was first announced, and I looked at the initial members of the Libra Association, and I thought, okay, well, we don't have a direct relationship with Facebook, but we've got relationships with that company and that company and that company, and so if and when there's an opportunity to work with some of those folks, I think we're well positioned. But in the meantime, we're going to focus on on solving the needs of our existing customers, and I'm pretty confident that there will be an intersection there at some point. But we're not going to try to compete with with the behemoths that have all the financial resources, the tech resources, and the distribution. Right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is Google's announcement comes on the heels of the launch of the Apple Card, right? Which was Goldman Sachs and Apple coming together. And what I've really tried to balance in my head, what you call distribution, I look at as distribution is one component, and the trust is another,
Yes,
right? Of like,
right.
look, I trust Apple with my, my iPods or whatever the hell they're called. I trust them with the iPhone, right? I trust them with my computer, etc. Why would I not trust them with banking, right?
Yep.
And there's plenty of people who say, there's data issues, there's privacy, there's all of these potential concerns. But for the most part, I think people feel pretty positive about Google, Apple, Facebook, etc. Is this a world where the finance industry is going to need them to continue to build trust? Or do you think that there's folks like Silvergate who they start to specialize, right? So rather than go really general and say, hey, we take everybody from anywhere and that's our focus and we want to stay really broad, right? Which is more of kind of like a JP Morgan or Wells type approach. You guys have done a great job of saying, look, we're very, very specifically focused on this one industry because we found a niche and we're the leader and we're going to kind of double and triple down. I'm guessing that there's other verticals that you'll eventually go into over time as well and kind of execute that same strategy. Is it a thing where you can get fast followed by the big guys into these niche strategies, or is it just right time, right place? You guys happen to understand the problems better, and you can really build a moat around certain industries, and then go try to replicate in other niche industries as well.
Yeah, so I certainly think that the bigger guys can do the fast follow strategy, right? And so when you think about competitive moats, that the whole reason in 2016 we hired Ben and said, hey, we've got something here. We need to figure out what we do next is because our first moat was the compliance, the regulatory compliance piece, right? Yeah. But I'm not naive. I knew that any large bank could just throw a bunch of bodies at that and replicate it, and it wouldn't take them nearly as long as it took us because we were doing it, during our day job, as we're running the rest of the bank. So the SEN became our next competitive moat, right? And then as you start to build the network effect that you mentioned earlier, the network effect, and we really do have like this two-sided network now, right? Where we've got the exchanges and the OTC desks, we got the institutional investors, and every time we add a new institutional investor, it creates value for the exchanges. Every time we add another exchange or OTC desk, it creates value for all the other institutional investors. So it's this virtuous loop. And so do I think that someone else can come in and replicate that? Perhaps. I'm not throwing the challenge out there. But the fact of the matter is, network effects are really difficult to disrupt. I mean, why is Tether so strong, right? I mean, Tether just gets pummeled, and yet they've got $4 billion, at least we think they do. But the important thing is the market thinks they do, right? And the market, and so network effects are just incredibly difficult. Now you also talked about trust, right? You can lose a network effect if you lose trust, right? And so now, having said that, we've seen the example with Libra. But why has Libra come under such attack? Because of some of the issues with Facebook, right?
It's a Facebook issue, not a Libra issue.
Exactly.
In most cases.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. But even with that, so with all the issues people have, with Facebook, it's still a pretty powerful force.
$400-500 billion company. They're
Absolutely.
doing okay.
Yeah, exactly. So you know,
And do you feel like that's a Western centric problem, right? Like I worked at Facebook, so you know, full disclosure, I'm highly biased, whether I think I am or not. But to me, it feels like the Twitter crowd, the kind of journalism crowd, the very kind of North American audience. We love to yell and scream and bring our pitchforks out and say, Facebook sucks and they're stealing our data and all stuff. My general take is probably people outside the United States. They're like, man, Facebook's pretty powerful, right?
Yeah,
it connects me to my friends and family, and
many people in the world, they don't. That's how they access the internet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're accessing. They're doing it with Facebook on their phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I do think the West and particularly the U.S. Yeah, I mean, just look at the at the crypto Twitter wars that go on. People love to take a position and then come hell or high water. That's the truth. So
intellectual combat is what I call
exactly.
it. Right? The intellectual combat is very real.
Yeah.
They should be giving out Purple Hearts on Twitter for the intellectual wounds that people take.
Yeah. And by the way, on that point, it's how cool is it? So you got Jack Dorsey, who who founds Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then Square, and then with the Cash App comes full circle with Square Crypto, and people are fighting about that on Twitter. So I mean, it's
cool. Funny you bring him up. I still think he is highly underrated in the industry in terms of how important he will become. Right,
Yeah.
So he's important today for sure in terms of Twitter. Obviously, he built that platform, Square. But he's recently been on this kind of world tour. He's been going. I think he was in Nigeria, then he was in Ghana, and I think he's kind of going through a couple of African countries. And he's meeting up with folks. And the only things he's sharing online are these Bitcoin meetups.
Right.
And there's not a lot of people there, right? I mean, he's at meetups and it looks like there's 7 or 8 people.
Yeah.
But he's taking the time, etc. And so I wonder a lot: is this a personal, social type trip, right, where he's just going for fun? Is this, hey, I want to understand my users on Twitter and Square,
right?
Or is what I immediately think through is, there's a world where actually Westerners are last to understanding the importance of Bitcoin and crypto because we do have banking, we do have the dollar, we have a credit card, right? There's all these infrastructure in place.
Yeah.
African countries, Asian countries, South American countries, like there's a lot of people who actually don't have that stuff available to them, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about the difference between if I have to sign up for a U.S. bank account and go through all the kind of hoops and hurdles of doing that, and to buy a stock, for example, versus if I have an internet connection, I can jump on, Binance or some exchange that's outside the United States and just buy a tokenized stock.
Yep.
The accessibility and frictionless experience of going with my internet connection on a crypto exchange may actually drive me to go do that rather than go the traditional route.
Yeah.
And so do those other countries leapfrog kind of U.S. infrastructure?
Yeah.
Right. They kind of did with mobile banking a little bit.
Yep.
And so I think a lot about just, are Westerners almost too spoiled to see the opportunity?
Yeah, no, and I mean certainly in crypto that's the case. I think where there are so many folks in non-Western the non-Western world that kind of get what kind of some of the core underlying values and opportunity is with Bitcoin. The stuff that you were just articulating, and that's one of the things. So when I get philosophical about this, I don't think that Bitcoin is going to replace the U.S. dollar, right? I don't think that it's now. Could it become as the Bitcoin standard? Could it become kind of like the reserve currency for the world and replace gold? Certainly, I mean, gold's got a huge head start, but
only 5,000 years.
Exactly. but if you think about it, I mean, in a digital world, what other asset is there that has the digital scarcity of Bitcoin? Now, folks don't understand it. It's still early, but give it another couple of decades, and it still will have nothing compared to the 5,000 years of gold. But things are moving a lot faster now too.
Yeah,
so.
For sure. What's been the one thing that you kind of sit back and say, in 2013 when I jumped into this, I didn't expect X to happen. Like what's been the most surprising thing over the last 6 years?
Just kind of on a superficial level, the price, right? I mean, I bought Bitcoin in 2013 as an experiment. It was I wanted to understand how it worked. I didn't buy enough because I didn't believe enough, But what I thought was, wow. So what I was reading that this thing called Bitcoin, everyone was going to be able to be their own bank. And as I shared earlier, I've been in banking my entire career, and I was like, "Oh, what am I going to do?"
Now, not work for myself.
Exactly. And so I thought I'm going to try this. And even though I'm not, I'm not a super techie guy deep in the weeds, I try everything. I just want to see how it works. So I bought some Bitcoin, and then the price ran up to $1,000. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. And then the price came back down. And I thought, yeah, okay. So, but I did buy more, because I thought, well, heck, I might as well just, one of the women on our board of directors said, Alan, we ought to just each buy $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, just forget about it. I wish I would have done that in 2013, so I did it later, but I bought a lot fewer
than you would have.
But if I was going to spend 10,000 today, I'd only get a little over one, So anyway, so the surprising thing, I guess, on the one hand is the price, and I think it's obviously got a lot of room to run still, but. And then, the development of the ecosystem, I kind of missed the whole internet thing. Okay. I was, that was in the early 90s. I was out of banking and running companies. And so, on the periphery, I was hearing about the internet, but I was in a wholesale bakery doing a Chapter 11 turnaround of this family-owned operation in San Diego. I didn't have time to,
internet.
I look back on some of the, something that you just wrote, where you were talking about, I think the
early internet,
the early internet, yeah, and hearing the dial tone, and seeing. That clip from what show was that?
I think it's Brian Gumbel.
Brian Gumbel, yeah. What is the internet? What's that @ symbol? or that A with a circle around it. So but yeah, so it's been just absolutely fascinating to be blessed to be at the early stages of this kind of revolution that is digital currency.
Yeah, and it's pretty crazy to me, I think, as you think through the impact that this can have on the world, right? In terms of the United States has been a great beneficiary of things like credit, for example, right? Things where people, when they're given access to financial services in terms of income generation and yield and ability to invest, etc. I always go back to just this idea that there's not a lot of people in the world on a percentage basis that have that access, right? And so I've spent a lot more time now thinking about like what I call income generating activities. So mining, right? I was talking to somebody from Venezuela recently, and he's like, "Look, man, the average person doesn't make that much money here, right? And guess what? That money is getting worse and worse in terms of the hyperinflation, etc. But I can buy a computer, I can plug it in at home." I could turn it on with my internet connection, and now all of a sudden I'm making money every month, right? And it's like more like income supplementation. And it really threw me down this hole of like, well, what else can you do with just an internet connection, right? So you could do staking, you can do mining, you can do these interest accounts. Like, start looking at it, and you're like, look, again, I don't think that it's going to completely solve the world's problems, right? And global warming disappears, right? And you're kind of like, how did you jump from Bitcoin to global warming? But in terms of giving access to what you and I would consider kind of table stakes financial services, it can be really powerful for economic development around the world. And what I look at is like, when do the governments realize this and say, you know what, maybe we aren't the best at trying to drive economic development. Instead, let's empower people to use these services, get connected to the rest of the world, financial industry, etc. It may never happen, or maybe it happens somewhat in the short term. But to me, it just feels like that's like another inflection point that onboards a lot of people very quickly, and kind of gets them into what I think is this alternative financial system that has a lot of benefit to it.
No, I definitely agree with that concept, I don't see governments, really kind of pushing that, right?
Yeah.
Because government, so, but if governments can just kind of, not over-regulate it and let it happen, I think it can be very complementary.
How do you look at the regulatory environment today in the U.S. with crypto? Like, you sit in an interesting seat because you actually are more regulated than almost every crypto company, right? Given that
Sure. Yeah.
you've had a state charter, et cetera. But when you look out at the crypto industry, there's a lot of people who say, "Hey, there's uncertainty, or the
Mhm.
rules need to change, et cetera." Like, you're probably one of the best people to have an opinion. What do you kind of think in terms of that regulation and the environment today?
Yeah, so there's certainly opportunity for for improvement of the regulatory climate, but what folks really need to understand is if you want to change the regulation, in most cases you have to change the law, right?
Mhm.
Regulations are just written to kind of interpret and essentially enforce the law in a certain sense, right? So when we first got into this, what our premise was, well, there are existing regulations
Yep.
that that determine how we're supposed to treat a money service business. What type of KYC are we supposed to do? What type of regulatory framework should these companies have? And one of the biggest kind of filters that we use when we're working with a new prospect, whether it be an exchange, OTC desk, do they understand the regulatory climate that they're stepping into, right? And if they don't have a view on which states they need a money transmitter license and which states they don't, do they have a compliance officer, or is the compliance officer also the CEO? I mean, in the early stages, folks were just really kind of coming up the learning curve, and it's understandable because they were essentially software engineers. They were coming from the technology world, and all of a sudden they had people banging on their door saying, "Hey, you need to comply with these laws." And they say, "Hey, wait a second! I just created this program to trade Bitcoin." And so we certainly had the benefit being a regulated financial institution and understanding regulation. It was just okay. Well, let's figure out how the existing rules apply. Mm-hmm. So I didn't buy the fact that this is the Wild West and it's not regulated. I said time out. It's regulated. We just people need to understand how it is. Mm-hmm. So now, are there opportunities for improvement? Certainly. I know there's a lot of concern about the state by state money transmission licensing. The fact that there is no federal one. But I mean, be careful what you wish for, right? To have one federal overseer for all of that, there is something to be said about the sovereignty of the individual states, and the way the U.S. is set up. So I think it's a mixed bag. Our goal is, we're certainly happy to enter into dialogue with regulators and with politicians, about how things could be improved, but those changes are probably going to be slow, and when we do get them, we're again, be careful what you wish for. So we're just going to focus on what are the rules and how do we comply with them. One of the things my wife teases me about is when I was growing up, I have three brothers. I loved to play board games, and I always read the rules, and so we just read the rules, and figure out what are the rules of the game, and that's how we got into this business, and that's how, as we think about new products and services, we have a relationship with the New York DFS. We're a California bank, right? So why would we have a relationship with the DFS? Well, because they regulate a lot of our customers, right? Yep. And so several years ago, we realized, what, we should know them and they should know us. And so we made an appointment. And I think initially they were like, well, why is this California bank coming here? But we have a dialogue with them. And so as we think about perhaps offering like the settlement for digital assets, and perhaps not doing that inside the bank, but maybe in a separate licensed entity that would be a sister company to the bank, there's an opportunity perhaps to do that here in New York, with the DFS. We've got a relationship with the OCC. They regulate national banks, but we've been in there to talk with them. The FDIC comes in, even though we're a member of the Fed, so the FDIC doesn't normally come into a state bank that's a Fed member because you only have one federal regulator. But the FDIC likes to come in to see what we're doing, and since they insure our deposits.
What's that crypto
exactly.
bank? Those guys are friendly with the crypto people. What are they doing?
Yeah. So we have a lot of dialogue with a lot of regulators.
Speaking of regulators and kind of lawmakers, there's a lot of talk now of a digital dollar, right? So the U.S. creating this digital dollar. Any thoughts in terms of good idea, bad idea, or kind of how you see that playing out?
Yeah. So it's interesting because in one sense, and I know this isn't what people are talking about, but in one sense, it's already digital, right? So that's I know that's not what folks are talking about. But when you go to the point,
90, just for those that are sitting at home, 93% of the money supply is not physical paper or physical coins.
That's right.
It exists somewhere in the digital world. When people talk about this quote unquote digital dollar, what they're talking about is essentially tokenizing the dollar.
Tokenizing the dollar, and then essentially making that though then a direct obligation of the Federal Reserve as opposed to an obligation from your bank, and that's the primary difference. Is when I have a bank account at Silvergate, right, and so theoretically that's where my money is. Right?
Breaking news: the CEO of Silvergate has a Silvergate bank account. Okay.
Well, hey, but that was important.
That gives me confidence.
Yes. Well, but I'll tell you when I bought my first Bitcoin. And I wanted to understand the experience of buying it through an exchange. So I connected, this is in October of 13, I connected my Silvergate account to my Coinbase account that I had opened online. I wanted to see where did my money go, and so I took great comfort being the CEO of Silvergate that I could really watch the account closely, so. So, but back to your question on the tokenized dollar, I think there's some things to figure out there, right? Because the whole credit system of the U.S., how do people get loans? They don't get loans directly from the Fed; they get them from banks, right? And why do banks, so banks are essentially fueling the economy, in the sense of kind of that's how the government creates money, right? Is through the banking system. And if you tokenize those dollars to where you don't have to go to a bank, but you can just do it direct, now all of a sudden there aren't deposits in commercial banks to fund the loans. And so there's some stuff to figure out there.
Mm-hmm. There's just a lot of challenges in terms of there's almost like second and third order effects of doing it.
Yep.
So you may solve one problem but create other problems.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, as we wrap up, rapid fire set of questions. What do you think is the most important company in crypto other than Silvergate? You're one of the only people who come in here who legitimately may be one of the most important companies. I joke with people usually, but you actually may be one of the most important guys. What do you think is the most important company other than Silvergate?
Sure. So I'm going to actually go back to our very first customer. I think the Digital Currency Group is probably because if you think about what they do, so they have three primary businesses, right? So they have Genesis Trading, where they are facilitating, the buying and selling of Bitcoin. They're also doing lending, right? So they've expanded their offerings. So that's one line of business there. They have Grayscale, which is the way that you can do institutional buying, of a regulated security, if you will, of all the different funds that they have. And then they've got CoinDesk, which is the marketing arm. But then importantly, they also then have investments in, and this is probably the most important piece from my perspective, they have investments in around 150 crypto companies. So they're providing seed funding and assistance with companies that are starting in this ecosystem. And so, hats off to Barry for the vision that he had, and then I want to thank him too for sending us some of those early referrals. And then I don't think we've mentioned this yet, but I should mention to you now that I've said I think they're the most important company. But I actually personally invested in Digital Currency Group back in 2015 when they were essentially selling second market. They were going all in, creating this company called DCG, the Digital Currency Group, I thought this would be a great way for Silvergate, to really participate. But I knew that the bank, talk about regulation, the bank wasn't going to be able to itself make an investment in Digital Currency Group. And so I approached Barry and asked him if he was doing a little friends and family round, and I wrote a very modest check. But it's been an incredible partnership, to have an inside view. And there's a lot of stuff that Digital Currency Group is going to be involved in that isn't going to be relevant to Silvergate, and that's okay. But
you got a front row seat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. What's the one regulation that you would change or improve if you could?
I'm going to stay away from all banking regulations.
Okay,
so
that's
I don't
fair.
get in trouble. I actually think the whole concept of a de minimis amount of Bitcoin, that you can transact with. Folks have talked about like $600 or something like that. I face this myself, so I'm a hodler. I bought Bitcoin. I tucked it away. But then when I wanted to experiment with, okay, well, what if I wanted to set up like my own node? I want to set up a Lightning node, for instance. So I'm going to go online and I'm going to buy a node. Okay, well, guess what? I can only do that with Bitcoin or Lightning. So now I've got to go, either sell some of my Bitcoin that I bought at $100 and pay tax on it, right? Or so I just bought some, so I just bought some new Bitcoin, But I mean, so that was like a $400 transaction that I'm going to have to pay tax on, right? And so
it's a huge discouragement, I think, right, to people making these smaller transactions.
Yeah.
So hopefully it gets figured out. What's the most important book you've ever read?
So I could give you a bunch of business books, but when you ask the question that broadly, I'm going to have to say the Bible. It's the only book that I read out of every day.
Yeah.
So
it's funny to me how few people say the Bible.
Yeah.
I would think that would be the most popular answer.
Yeah.
And most people usually say, whatever other book.
Sure.
But I think it is for those that read the Bible, it probably is the most important book,
no,
right?
it's the only book that I always have in. I've got it in my backpack. I read it every day.
I love it.
And
that's awesome. What about aliens? Believer, non-believer?
Yeah. So.
Oh, he may go with a no.
No. I'm not going to go with a no because it's certainly possible, right? I mean, it's absolutely possible. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. Now, I love, I grew up, enjoying science fiction, that kind of stuff. And so, but it's just, I mean, there's so much to do here on Earth and with our fellow human beings that I don't spend a lot of time worrying about, whether or not, but is it possible? Absolutely, it's possible.
Are you somebody who would be more interested in space exploration or ocean exploration?
So actually probably space exploration.
Okay, space. Okay.
So, and that just, I had a telescope when I was little, I loved astronomy,
It fascinates me how, and maybe it is because we're little or whatever, but just the human desire to look out and go up and kind of, space, all that stuff, when we don't know what's underneath the water.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Like it just strikes me as, and again, I don't know if it's a human nature thing or what, but just there's not that many people who say I'm very interested in what's beneath the water, and here on Earth.
But if you think about it, and I grant you that most of the Earth is covered by water, but there are a lot of people that don't touch the ocean, but everyone
looks up. Yeah, that's
so,
very fair.
Yeah.
What one question you have for me to end this thing?
So what do you think the most important company in crypto is? You talk to a lot of companies.
Yeah, I cheat.
So you've probably been asked this question before.
Not actually that often. I say Bitcoin. Yeah, it's not a company, right? But just the market has determined it to be the most valuable. It was the first. It's I joke and say it's like the first love of anyone who comes to the industry, right? Is Bitcoin got me here, right?
Yeah.
And maybe they kind of go their own path, whatever. But that one will always be there. But in terms of companies, so that's always my answer. And then some people push me. They're like, "Well, you can't say not a company."
Yeah.
Right now, And I'm always careful to say, like, this actually changes in my opinion,
Sure.
right? Based
Yep.
on market dynamics,
Yep.
kind of where companies are. People can fall from grace,
Yeah,
right? All that kind of
right.
stuff. Right now, I'd have to say that Binance is probably the most important. And I say important because, one, it's one of the deepest liquidity pools, if not the deepest. It's also got probably the most aggressive kind of land and expand strategies. So start with the spot exchange, and then it quickly
Yep.
add futures and lending
Right.
and all this other kind of stuff. And then the third part, and probably the part that is most underrated about the company that I've started to think more about, CZ and that executive team are probably most open to working with non-North American countries
Yep.
to really drive adoption basically everywhere else in the world.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of companies who say, hey, I want to be in the US, I want to be a US-based company, or I want to service US customers. And then there's people who focus on China and kind of Asia.
Mhm.
But there's a whole bunch of countries that get left out. South America, Africa, Europe,
Right.
kind of the whole Middle East. You kind of just go through all of this. And if you look at some of the countries that Binance has pushed into, it's not places that you would normally think about.
Yeah. No.
Right?
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah.
Uganda.
Right. Yeah.
Who's sitting there in their corporate boardroom saying, "Hey, what's our Uganda strategy?"
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But for
Right.
whatever reason, right,
Yeah.
and I actually don't even know the story as to why that became a place where they really pushed in and kind of got a lot of success. But I saw recently, I think people will correct me on Twitter if I'm wrong on this, but I think he was in Uzbekistan or somewhere, right? And kind of just these kind of obscure places when you think of
Right.
it from a corporate planning process.
Mhm.
But there's millions of people that live in these countries who
Right.
they want access to this stuff. And so right now I think they're kind of pushing the pace. And look, they are either going to be successful or not. But
Yeah.
when you have somebody out in front pushing the pace like that, everyone else is playing catch up.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and so you kind of drive the competition
Mhm.
by having somebody who's willing to kind of go out there. So for right now, was this November 2019, I'd say Binance. Ask me in 6 months, and
Yeah.
CZ don't mess up, or I'll have to change my answer. So listen,
right.
thank you so much for doing this. Where can people go if they want to open an account at Silvergate or become a customer? Where can they go?
Silvergate.com.
In the legacy world, they have the .coms
We do.
and they act like normal companies.
Yeah, we're a company that actually has to make money.
I won't say the name of the company, but I was looking for somebody's website recently, and I tried every get at the name,
Yeah.
with at the name app.com.
Right,
I was
right.
trying all these different things. I couldn't find it, and Google wasn't being helpful. And it eventually ended up being with the name of the company .io.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, that's no wonder I couldn't figure that one
Yeah,
out.
no kidding.
So, awesome.
Cool.
And
Well,
then
thank you very much. Yeah.
you're on Twitter as well?
I'm on Twitter at Silvergate CEO.
All right, don't leave because then you have to change the Twitter name.
That's right.
All right, Al, thanks so much for doing this.
All right. Thank you.